So volume 25 of One Punch Man has been released, and with it we got a nice little bonus chapter. We also got some volume extras, which are standard, but the bonus chapter that we got is pretty interesting, at least to me. I mean, it's mostly just tongue-in-cheek, and it's just a funny little thing that one Murata just put in there for our amusement. But also, if you're a weirdo like me and like to read too much into the story, then it has a lot of meaning to it, because it gives us a glimpse of Saitama on his path to removing his limiter. Something that we don't really get too much insight into, actually. I mean, we see the beginning of it, in the first episode when he takes on Crablante, and that eventually leads him on his path, which we wind up seeing in the Road to Hero OVA, which is great, by the way. You should really check that out if you haven't already. In my opinion, it's essential One Punch Man viewing. But after that, at least on the timeline of Saitama in his training years, we intermittently see it here and there in a few bonus chapters, and I'll talk about another one of those because it kind of ties into this one. But outside of that, we don't really see too much, and the timeline itself is kind of spotty. And speaking of the timeline, thankfully we're actually getting some confirmed time in this bonus chapter as well, because it says that it's taking place about a year and a half ago. And I made a video a few years ago about how strong Saitama would have been if he didn't remove his limiter, meaning like how strong he would have been if he got to the point of where he was about to remove it but didn't, and kind of just stayed at the level cap. And within that video, I kind of mapped out the timeline as best as I could. And what we're getting here is kind of lining up with what I thought was the time of him approaching the point of removing his limiter. Because it goes back to chapter 11 when Saitama gives us the initial insight into his training and what led to him removing his limiter. Because when he's talking to Dr. Genus and Carnage Kabuto, he says, "I was able to get this strong in 3 years. 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats every day." But he says after continuously doing this, 1 year later, he noticed a change, and he was bald, but he had gotten stronger. Now that whole statement there is a little ambiguous because he says 1 year later, despite saying 3 years ago initially when he started his training. But in this bonus chapter, we see that he still has his hair despite it saying about a year and a half ago. So I suppose we're just supposed to take our own account of time into consideration here, compensating for the amount of time that he went through initially before it was 1 year later. So when we see these panels here of him, going through the training and whatnot, this was a couple months already. And then after that, 1 year later, that's when he lost his hair. Now that brings us to the other bonus chapter that I was talking about that kind of ties into this, because in the volume 3 bonus chapter, Summer, I think when we see Saitama in that chapter, I think is pretty much around the same time that we're seeing Saitama in this chapter, because I also talked about that in my video about how strong Saitama would have gotten if he didn't remove his limiter. And I don't know how I came up with a year and a half. Maybe I did the same chapter 11 calculation, because in that chapter, that's the strongest that we see Saitama pre him being bald. He's able to one-shot a demon level cicada nymph monster in that chapter, which is pretty cool, because I guess this is the only instance of us seeing Saitama at an objective S-class level, if you will. I mean, it's possible he was even stronger than S-class, but I just say that because this is more comparable to one of the stronger S-class level feats. And also the fact that he still has his hair, of course, but in this chapter we see he has a bald spot, and his hair is coming out as he's running, which is showing us this is close to him either removing his limiter or his limiter was starting to break, as it said with Garou when he was going against Darkshine. And we can see how one tries to distinguish between the two, although he has been very, I'll say it again, ambiguous with the limiter. But it also draws more parallels between Saitama and Garou, I think, because Garou, on his path to breaking and or removing his limiter, or in his own words, attaining disaster level god, he went through the left path of, becoming a monster, slowly but surely, firstly being a wishful monster, and then becoming the half-human hybrid monster thing that he was, until where he is currently in the manga, where he's 98 or 99% a monster, but still hasn't removed his limiter. And I say that because, in my opinion at least, you can't be a monster and remove your limiter. Like what Dr. Gina says in chapter 86 is pretty much the truth. God, like the being that we see visit Homeless Emperor, did in fact put a limiter on all of humans who are under his system. And I go way more in depth in this in my video, Why People Become Monsters, so check that video out. But anyway, coming back to this volume 25 bonus chapter, this could be the follow-up to the summer bonus chapter. Or it could be before that, maybe, not really sure, but it's around the same time for sure. But anyway, after doing his, standard training for that day, we see Saitama in the shower afterwards, and he has like more hair in his hands. And I'm sure this relates to a lot of us in real life. I mean, I know so many of you have perfect hair genetics, but some of us, like myself, who don't, our hair comes out in our hands in the shower, unfortunately. Also, some serious Murata fan service in this chapter too. But Saitama like digging through his hair more and more, and he says, feels like my hair swirl is getting bigger. I'm afraid what the back of my head looks like now, but I only have one mirror. Maybe if I turn around fast enough, I could see it. Then we see Saitama, standing back to the mirror so that it has the reflection of the back of his head. And then we see him trying to turn around fast enough as to where he can see the back of his head's reflection faster than the mirror can keep up with him turning around. He's like, oh God, let's do it again and again. And he keeps trying and he keeps failing. And then we see him like get serious, and we start seeing like the aura come around him, and he keeps trying again and again and again until eventually the narration says, whether this was true, there is no way to verify, but at that instance, Saitama did in fact catch a glimpse of the back of his head. So yeah, Saitama is Saitama, and he somehow breaks the laws of physics here, and he's able to move so fast that the mirror is unable to keep up with his speed, and he's able to see pretty much the past of the reflection of the back of his head. This is great one writing here, and I just wish this bonus chapter was a little longer, because to be honest, a lot of one's talent really comes out in his bonus chapters. Like some of the best chapters in the entire series are like the earlier bonus chapters. But this moment in time, has he removed his limiter yet, or is he like breaking it? I don't know. It really depends on who you ask. I mean, if you ask like one of the pedantic psychos on a certain social media platform, they'll get real aggressive with you and tell you, this is the way that it is, this is what happened, and if you say otherwise, you're an idiot. Or if you ask other people, they'll say, hey, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. If you ask me, I'll say, the whole limiter stuff and breaking and removing and timelines, at this point, it's kind of up for interpretation until one explicitly makes it clear exactly what is going on. And besides just with the whole removing the limiter aspect, he hasn't really done that yet. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the video today, guys. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments. And if you liked it, please give it a like, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.